There, it's Lara here with another Witchy Wednesday astrology forecast. This one's for the week of June 12th to 18th, 2019. So, the majority of this video, we're going to discuss the full moon in Sagittarius that's coming up on the 17th. But we have some other things to mention before we get there, because all of this is sort of a lead up to this full moon. A lot of it I spoke about in last week's video. So if you really want the details, please go back and listen to that because it's still very relevant what I spoke about in that video. I talked about the subject of sacred anger and some other things, and that is very relevant for where we're at this week. So if you didn't get a chance to listen to that, please go back and listen to it, especially the intro part. That's where you're going to hear, really the crux of things. But I'm going to remind you of a couple of things in this video, and we're going to talk about the full moon and where that's playing out for each of the signs. So you'll get a better idea of, where that energy is really impacting you. Thank you for being here. I haven't said that yet. I really do appreciate it. If you're a new subscriber, welcome. I really appreciate you being here. And, if these messages resonate with you, then I'd love to know. And you can do that by liking the video, leaving a comment, sending a message, whatever you're comfortable with, sharing with people you think might be interested. All of those things are helpful to me in spreading the word. And of course, if you're interested in having a personal reading, then you can find out about that at my website, and the link is below. I mentioned that there's a few tweaks happening to the website, so that'll unfold over the next, probably month or so. But you can, access it and get the info you need and order a reading if you want. And you can also reach me on Facebook and Instagram, and the links to those are below as well. Okay, let's get on with it. So I like to start, in case you've never seen one of these videos before, I like to let you know where the moon is at, because it's very relevant to us, right? As humans, we really feel the ebbs and flows of the moon. And when we get a sense of the moon cycles, we can start to understand. It brings us greater self-awareness, and we can understand our own energy patterns, and we can tap into which days and which energies work best for us for certain things. So today we have the moon in Libra, and that Libra, obviously it's about gaining equilibrium, right? Libra is always searching for balance and equilibrium. But there's a bit of a fly in the ointment today, because the asteroid Eris, goddess of strife and discord, she's a bit of a badass. She is actually having a conversation with the moon. She's opposing the moon today, opposite the moon. So the normal, balanced kind of not wanting to rock the boat energy of Libra can be disrupted a little bit. And then we've got the moon moving into Scorpio on Friday. So that will be asking us to take a deep dive over the weekend. And then moving into Sagittarius late on Saturday. And we're going to have the full moon in Sag on the 17th, on Monday. And then the moon will enter Capricorn on Monday afternoon, after the full moon happens. And just so you're aware, I use Eastern Standard Time when I give you times, because that's my time zone, but you can adjust accordingly, all right? So that moon is going to happen 4:31 a.m. Eastern Standard Time at approximately around 26 degrees. I have to look at the chart here because I forget. Between 25 and 26 degrees of Sagittarius. So we're going to talk about that in more detail in just a minute, but I kind of want to reiterate not much of, but I want to iterate the main point of what I spoke about in last week's video, because that energy is still building and it's pretty intense. And I am experiencing this big time on a personal level, not only because of the general, astrology, but I've also got some really very potent transits happening to my own chart that are just kind of amping everything up. It's been a little bit, honestly, it's been a little bit difficult to deal with. I have a lot of anger. I have a lot of anger that's bubbling up to the surface, and that is quite common for what we're going through right now. And I'm hearing that sentiment from a lot of people, whether those be people that I know personally or people that have connected for readings, or people online. Everybody, mostly, kind of in my sphere, is feeling this on some level. And it may play out in, tempers. It may be internal, sort of like aggression directed internally. Not the best option, but, it is what it is. It can be really serious passive aggressiveness. It can also be getting fired up about wanting to move forward with something, wanting to take action, and feeling frustrated because it's just not happening for whatever reason, or there's obstacles in the way, there's blockages, authority, this kind of thing is kind of getting in the way. And so that can be frustrating. It's do what you can to discharge this, right? To discharge this powerful energy, lots of which is coming from Mars right now, also from asteroid Eris. But just physical activity, self-care, trying to give yourself the space that you need right now, keeping your distance from people and situations that trigger you, trying to be mindful. It's difficult, and I'm giving you advice that I'm having a hard time taking myself right now. I mean, I know this. Sometimes it's really easier said than done, and I appreciate that completely. But at least having an awareness of it is helpful, right? So we're at this triggery point in the year, very triggery point in the year, and that's going to continue through until, I'm going to say, probably around, like the 23rd will be the last kind of, and then after that, it should dissipate a little. Of course, this depends on what's going on for you in your individual chart. We have eclipse season starting early July, right? And that first eclipse will be in the sign of Cancer. And that can bring some intensity to some folks. Some folks will feel that more than others, but we'll talk about that later in a future video when we get closer. But so we've got all this Mars activity still, right? Mars in Cancer is conjunct, Mercury is conjunct Mars in Cancer, opposite Saturn, which will be exact on the 14th. And then it will be exactly opposite Pluto less than a week later than that. But it's brewing now, right? It's close. So we've been feeling it. And then we also have the Sun in what we call a quincunx to Saturn and Pluto. So the Sun in Gemini. And a quincunx is 150-degree angle conversation. And it's like this conversation of, it's like an itch you can't scratch. It's like irritability and, adjustments need to happen, but it's kind of like, we don't really know how to make that happen, and it can be a bit irritating. And so So that's playing out as well. I never mentioned that in last week's video. We also have Mars squaring Eris exact on the 23rd. I didn't mention that in last week's video either. So, a square is a conversation of tension where, and it's a dynamic conversation. Something's got to give, right? And so that's happening. We're building towards that. And in fact, Eris, again, asteroid, right? Goddess of discord and strife, is opposing the moon today as I speak here. And so, the moon moves quite quickly. That will pass over the course of the day, but that is highlighted today. We're getting a flavor of that energy. And so overall, we're in this really kind of edgy, irritated time and uncomfortable time. And some people are describing it as like, I'm just, it can be things like, I'm frustrated. I don't know why. I'm exhausted. I'm agitated. Or I'm all out, like, like I'm raging kind of thing. Like it runs the gamut, but it's not comfortable. And so just know that this is where we're at. You're not alone. It's serving a purpose, this time period that we're in. And so try to tap into what this is teaching you, whatever's happening for you right now. And so that it doesn't just end up being this, kind of nasty point in the year, and then nothing, you don't really gain anything from having gone through the experience. That's not what we want to happen. So let's start to talk more about the actual full moon in Sagittarius that's happening. Again, on the 17th, 4:31 a.m. at about 25 to 26 degrees of Sagittarius, right? I will start by saying that because Sagittarius is a mutable sign, the mutable signs will tend to feel this full moon the most, particularly if you have planets and points between, say, I'm going to give it a wide angle, 20 and 30 degrees kind of thing of the mutable signs. But truthfully, nobody is being completely spared, right? Because at this time, because there's just so much going on in the chart. And I will show you the chart in a minute. Actually, why don't I show you the chart right now, and then we'll carry on with discussing this. So here is the chart for the full moon, okay? This isn't the chart for today. I drew this chart up for the full moon because that's the main subject of this video. If you look at the chart for today, you will see all these red lines here, right? Red lines indicate conversations of tension, perhaps discomfort, dynamism, polarity, these kinds of things, right? More challenging conversations. If you look at the chart for today, it's like this big red blotch all over the chart with a teeny weeny bit of green and blue. And the green and blue lines are the more easy flowing opportunistic conversations. But this is the chart for the full moon in Sagittarius on the 17th. So you can see we still do have quite a bit of kind of challenge going on here, right? Between Cancer and Capricorn, all those, what's brewing in Capricorn there, Pluto, Saturn, South Node, and then North Node, Mercury and Mars together in the sign of Cancer, where the eclipses are going to be taking place in July. But here's the moon. So we've got the moon, which will be full. And the reason we know that is because the sun and the moon are directly opposite each other at the time of a full moon, right? The moon is reflecting the light of the sun. That's what's going on there. So they're in an opposition. And I'll talk about that a little bit more as we move on here. And we've also got the ruler of Sagittarius, right? Which is where this new moon is, or full moon is happening, right beside the moon. So conjunct. And so this kind of adds an extra punch of Sagittarius Jupiterian energy, and I'll speak about that. I also want you to take note of Neptune and Pisces there. Neptune and Pisces will go retrograde at the time of the solstice. I'll talk about that in next week's video. But Neptune is factoring into this moon, and I'll let you know how so. You can see some nice sort of green and blue conversations are happening, which is some relief, some support that we're going to get. But it's in an opposition to Jupiter, right? Neptune, a square to Jupiter. Neptune in Pisces and is squaring Jupiter in Sagittarius. And then on this chart, I put Eris. I wanted to show you. There is Eris. That's the symbol for the asteroid Eris. Okay, and today she's at 24 Aries, which is right across from where the moon is in Libra today, right? But by the time of the full moon, the moon will be in Sagittarius, and Eris will be squaring Mars on the just after the full moon on the 23rd. So there is the chart. Hopefully that makes sense to you. And let's talk a little bit more about that Neptune piece, right? Because Neptune has impact on this full moon. As I mentioned, there's a Jupiter in Sagittarius. When I'm looking down here, in case you don't know, I have some notes, right? Because I can't keep all of this in my head, and that's what I'm just taking a look at the details. So Jupiter is squaring Neptune exactly on the 16th, so the day before the full moon, and then it is sextiling Saturn and Capricorn. So these two aspects are bookending this full moon. And Jupiter square Neptune can lead us to being potentially overly optimistic, overly indulgent, too trusting, too generous, perhaps, a little bit over the top. It's a good energy for fantasizing and healthy escapism, dreaming big, these kinds of things. But it can be taken too far with this energy. And then the sextile to Saturn, right? So Saturn or sextile is a 60-degree angle. It's a conversation of kind of opportunity. And that is lending some spiritual wisdom. When you put Saturn and Neptune together, that's kind of the catchphrase, I guess. Some spiritual wisdom, some patience in making our dreams, Neptune, a reality, Saturn. And really an ability to see the deeper meaning, Neptune, behind the struggles and the obstacles that we have undergone. And so that's kind of supportive at this time. And then I mentioned that Eris is kind of a fly in the ointment, right, around this time and into the full moon and after the full moon. But Eris is also making a trine. So a conversation of ease and flow to the new moon. And I keep saying new moon, to the full moon. And it's sextiling the sun. So again, this is some support, right? It's support for whatever we're working through right now. And validation, I think, as well, that perhaps the anger and the irritation and the agitation that we're feeling may be very necessary at this time. Again, I spoke in last week's video, I used the phrase sacred anger, right? Sometimes anger is necessary for us to make change. And we just have to be mindful of how we are directing that anger. And so this this Eris energy might be helping us to shift and rebalance whatever needs rebalancing in our lives right now, right? Because it's stirring up that anger and it's making us go, okay, like I've had it with whatever it is, and this needs to change. It needs to change for me. It needs to change perhaps for those that I care about. It needs to change for all of us, perhaps in some way. So that's what's going on with the different planets involved in this full moon. But we'll talk now a little bit more about the actual energy of the full moon in Sagittarius, and then we'll go through each of the signs. So Sagittarius is the optimist, right? The eternal optimist kind of thing. It craves, the energy of Sagittarius craves freedom and expansion and adventure and truth and it wants to kind of, it's a seeker, wants to learn something new, have new experiences. And on the shadow side, Sagittarius can be so set in its convictions, like my philosophy or beliefs are the only way, right? It can be a bit dogmatic or preachy. Also prone to exaggeration, likes to tell tall tales, perhaps. And also maybe, having a tendency on the shadow side to not look before it leaps, right? So those are some with every energy, no matter what, there's always a higher vibration and a lower vibration, right? As I say to you. So that's kind of the energy of Sag. And Sagittarius is ruled by the planet Jupiter, which is in very close conversation with the full moon at this point, right? At the point of the full moon. And Jupiter as an energy is known to bring, luck, abundance, emotional upliftment, joy, faith, growth, But again, that growth can be sort of uncontrolled and just, expanding, without ever sort of checking itself, right? But generally known to be a beneficial planet, a benefic planet. They called it in ancient times. But the again, on sort of the shadow side, Jupiter can have a tendency to promise more than it can deliver, so there's that. This is the last full moon before the next eclipse cycle, right? So the next eclipse we have will be an eclipse in Cancer, and it will be officially setting off the next eclipse cycle, which will take place on the Cancer Capricorn axis. The last eclipse cycle was in Leo and Aquarius. We had one eclipse in Cancer last July, but then the eclipses went back. That's because of retrograding. The eclipses went back into Leo and Aquarius, and now officially in early July, we are beginning this eclipse cycle. So if you think back to last July, I can't remember the date of the eclipse in Cancer, but you may get a sense of something that gave you a little taste of what the upcoming eclipse cycle will be like for you. But again, getting ahead of ourselves here because I'm going to talk about the eclipse in a future video. But I wanted to mention it here because of the full moon. This is the last full moon before the next eclipse cycle. And so full moons in general they tend to be about something coming to fruition, about a culmination, an ending, an illumination, heightened awareness, this kind of thing. And so because this is the last full moon before the new eclipse cycle, that's even more amplified, right? And so there will be even more kind of heightened awareness, insight, illumination, things coming true to fruition, things reaching a bit of a fever pitch around this time. So I'm going to speak to each of the signs. And when I do, I want you to keep this in mind. This moon on an individual level is about where we are craving freedom in our lives, right? And it's good to use kind of the collaboration of all of these energies that I've been speaking about earlier in the video and in last week's video to allow you to really firmly articulate what is making you feel fenced in right now and unable to kind of expand and grow as you are, longing to. It's a good opportunity to admit that to yourself and to others. That you are craving some kind of freedom or adventure or new learning experience in at least one area of life. And when you articulate that, do that with compassion, but also with fear, with firmness. And if it comes down to it, with ferocity. And by that, I don't mean like, violently lashing out at people, or harming yourself. I mean standing firmly in your convictions, like a Sagittarius would do, and allowing yourself to take up space like Jupiter, right? Quit playing small, quit contracting for other people's benefits. Because really that serves no one in the long term, right? There's enough room for all of us to share space. So think about where you're craving inspiration, adventure, new beginnings, new learning. Not so much new beginnings, that's more of a full moon, but like taking things to the next level, getting more awareness into something, being freer in a certain area. And the house that the full moon sits in will give you some insight as to what area of life that's really happening in for you. Now, the full moon is always, sun and moon opposition, like I showed you in the chart. And this is like the divine masculine polarized with the divine feminine, right? And there is a need at the time of a full moon to address the imbalances there, right? To bring those energies back into balance on whatever axis they fall in the chart for us, whatever, houses they fall for us. And as individuals, we are going to likely feel this need to regain balance, or this conflict or polarization on the axis that, of course, the moon is in, so Sagittarius, and the sun is in Gemini. Those are opposite each other in the chart. Something might come to a head around this time, right? And you may be feeling that already, whatever that is. It may come to a head in order to be resolved. And we're likely to gain insights into whatever we have been mentally grappling with over this intense Gemini season at this time too. So, and whatever was initiated at the time of the new moon in Gemini will come to fruition at this time, or level up, or we'll have an aha moment about it, or gain some insight. We may have, an aha moment like, well, that really sucked, but now I kind of understand why that had to happen for my own growth, right? And expansion. So this need for balance is even being amplified further because we're moving towards the solstice on June 21st, which is the balance point in the year, right? And we'll talk more about that, like I said, in next video. But let's go through the signs now, and I will point out to you the house that the full moon is happening for you. So keep in mind all of the things that I just said, right? The intro, that's so important. Make sure you listen to the intro. So I'll point out the house that this is happening for you, the life area, and then the axis, like what is the house opposite that? And you'll get an idea of perhaps where things are out of balance and need to be brought back into alignment, into balance, right? And I always start with the first house. So I know a lot of astrologers will just start with Aries. They'll go through the natural zodiac. I don't do that for a few reasons. I start with the first house, wherever the event that I'm talking about, whatever sign it's happening for in the first house, that's where I start. And then I go that way. So it's starting with Sagittarius. And you need to also be mindful of the fact that when we're talking about these general readings, I'm going to say it again. I know, I'm sorry if you hear me say this every week, but it's for new folks or people that haven't heard this yet. In a general reading, always look at your rising sign first and foremost. Your rising sign or your ascendant sign. Those two things mean the same thing. Because that will be the most accurate and the most obvious. Also listen for your sun sign and your moon sign if you want, right? Those will give you, your moon sign will give you sort of like the more emotional level that things are playing out on. And then the sun will be more the ego kind of level, the personality level. But and to a degree, kind of like the soul level. But the rising sign will tend to sort of be how things show up in the world for us, right? Show up in the material kind of plane for us. And I don't know what house your sun is in unless I see your specific birth chart. But I do know that, you know, if you're a Sagittarius rising, that means Sagittarius was rising, was on the horizon at the moment you were born, then I know that this full moon is happening in your first house, right? And if you're a Scorpio rising, it's happening in your second house, etc., etc. That's why we talk about the rising sign first in these general forecasts. Okay, so we're going to start with Sag. So Sagittarius, this is your full moon, and it's happening in your first house of the self, right? You as an individual and your individual journey through life. This is the house of your physical vitality, your physical appearance, the way you kind of present yourself to the world, your instinctual approach to the world. And this is on the axis of relationship, right? First house, seventh house. So the sun is in Gemini in the seventh house, opposite the full moon, opposite the moon in Sag. And so this is the axis of relationship. So this is about me, my individuality, my autonomy versus you or we in partnership, right? One-to-one partnerships. And so there may be some adjusting that needs to happen at the time of this full moon, and some realizations and aha moments and insights and something coming to fruition in terms of that axis for you, of those life areas, right? Focused on the first house, but also relating to the opposite side of the same coin, right? The seventh house, so the axis of relationship, me, you. So that's where things are shaking down for you, Sagittarius. And, you know, you will know when you think about this, what this specifically means for you. It could be, I'm just trying to think of an example. It could be something like having a realization that you want to do something drastic to your physical appearance, and your partner is not so sure about that. That's just a really simple example, but so that's just what I'm gonna leave you with to give you an idea. Moving on now to Scorpio. Scorpio, the full moon in Sag is happening in your second house of personal resources, of material possessions, of your values, your self-worth, you know, how you make your money kind of thing. All of those things fall into the second house. So that's where some illumination, fruition, insight, aha moment, you know, kind of potentially crisis point is happening for you, right? You want some freedom there. The Sagittarius is wanting, is saying, you know, I want to be free in this area of life in some way. And what may be impacting that is across the chart in the eighth house of shared resources, of the psychological rather than the material, of transformation versus form, right? Of shared resources versus my resources, right? And so that may be, those things are highlighted for you at the time of this full moon. And, you know, something is calling for your attention to be brought back into balance there. And in doing so, this will allow you that sense of more freedom that you crave, particularly in that second house area for you, Scorpio rising. Okay, so I am trying to think of an example for you. So this could be you want to change the way you make money. So it could be like, you know, you want to start a side gig or something like that to make some more money. But you need to potentially get a loan from the bank for that to happen, 8th house. And so there's some things to work out here for you to be able to do that. Okay, so that's kind of like a very, very basic example, but kind of, you know, something that could potentially be triggered at the time of this full moon. So that's for you, Scorpio. Moving on to Libra now, Libra rising, Libra sun, Libra moon. We've got the full moon in Sagittarius happening in your 3rd house of communications, like the daily communications, you know, text messages, emails, phone calls, just verbal communications. This can have to do with even your internal communications, the internal dialogue that you have. It is also about your immediate environment, you know, close to home environment, meaning siblings, cousins, neighbors, community, your peers, this sort of thing, short commutes that you do. It also has to do with early learning, right? And so something is coming to a head here at the time of this full moon. You're craving freedom here, right? Like maybe you want to cut the cord to the 50,000 emails you get a day. Just, you know, that's one example. You need some freedom from that. You feel like it's bogging you down and it's just, you know, not allowing you to grow and move forward because you're spending so much of your time addressing that. So this is happening on the axis of communications of lower mind versus higher mind. Higher mind is the 9th house, which is across the chart from the 3rd. And, you know, of the kind of day-to-day 3rd house versus the bigger picture ideas and philosophies of sort of lower education versus higher education, right? The immediate environment versus the big wide world. That's the axis that this is playing out on for you. And so getting back to the example of, you know, like just being bogged down by the daily communications potentially, it may be, you know, you've got something to work out on this axis. Maybe, you know, some kind of, you're going to have some kind of education around how to better manage, you know, these things. And that's going to help you. Maybe, what else could it be? Maybe you're really, you know, you're wanting to get away and have a bit of an adventure and maybe go on a long distance trip, but the stuff in your immediate environment is making it difficult for you to do that. Or there's just a lot to do that needs to be taken care of before you can do that. You know, so on some way there needs to be some balance gained on that axis in the chart for you. But the full moon itself is happening in the 3rd house. So that's for you, Libra. Moving on to Virgo. Virgo, we've got the full moon in Sagittarius happening in your 4th house of home, family, emotional security, your place of living, your kind of private life, you know, your close tribe, the mother energy in your life could be actual mother or just like mother figures. And so there's some kind of aha moment, insights, illumination, culmination coming to fruition happening in that 4th house area. And you're craving some freedom in some way surrounding, you know, at least one or more of those things that fall into the 4th house. And this is happening on the axis of your chart, the 4th and 10th, right? Opposite the 4th is the 10th house of public life, of your career ambitions, of authority, of material security, right? Versus emotional security, of the legacy, the public legacy you want to leave versus the private legacy kind of thing, home, you know. This is the axis. I mentioned this in a recent Facebook post, I think. This is the axis of parenting. So it's like, right, because Capricorn, 10th house, it's like the father figure, the more authoritarian, where Cancer rules the 4th house. It's the more mother figure, nurturing. It's like the divine masculine and the divine feminine. And so there is something going on this axis for you that is coming to a head now, that needs to be resolved, you know, that that this full moon is illuminating for you. And so, you know, maybe lots of things going on in the home environment that feel like they are preventing you from, you know, chasing your kind of career goals potentially, or, you know, there is some kind of battle going on, you know, between the sort of mother and father energy in some way, potentially as well. So that's for you, Virgo. And moving on to Leo, we're going to speak to Leo, where we've got the full moon happening in the 5th house. And I'm going to mention to you right now that the video may cut off. And if that happens, I'm just going to record a second piece to get to the rest of the signs. So you'll see a part 1 and a part 2. Okay, because I know I'm not going to get through all 12 signs before this cuts off. Guaranteed. So moving on to Leo. Leo, we've got a full moon in your 5th house. And this is the house of the individual. It's the house of your creative self-expression. It's the house of children that you are personally associated with, right? Your children, children you work with, that kind of thing. It's the house of what sparks joy for you in the moment. And there's something coming to a head here and coming to fruition, something that needs to, that's really being highlighted at the time of this full moon, and that needs to be kind of balanced out with the opposite house, which is the 11th house. And that is about, you know, the collective, not the individual like the 5th house, the collective. It's about the group, potentially friendship groups. It's about collaboration rather than individual creativity. It's about, rather than, you know, sort of specific individual children you're associated with, it's more like about philanthropy, right? And it's about what we vision for our future. And so something on this axis is out of balance, and the full moon in the 5th house is shining a light on where you're craving some freedom, and perhaps adventure and that kind of thing. And, you know, maybe what's kind of getting in your way of achieving that will be illuminated at the time of this full moon. And you may have some insights into, again, oh, okay, I've been going through a really hard time and now I'm kind of seeing why, right? Particularly in this area of life. So it could be like, this may be like, as a parent, if you're a parent, your children going through a difficult time with friendship groups. You know, that's just one small example. This could be you having a conflict between your individual creativity and some kind of group collaboration. And that needs to be ironed out in some way. You know, you're craving more individual autonomy in terms of and freedom in terms of your individual creativity. That's potentially something that could be going on. So that's for you, Leo. And I am going to stop here and stop the video. And then I'm going to carry on into the next video with Cancer through to Capricorn, because the video is going to cut off and I don't want to start all over again. Okay, so thank you. And let me know how things are going for you if this is all you're watching. But if your sign is not has not been spoken about yet, then go check out part 2 and you'll find it there. Okay, take good care. Deep breaths. All right. Bye-bye.